Hi guys, welcome to part 2 of Stripping Trouble's dash. In this episode we're going to finish the dash strip down and I'm going to be continuing the tool count to see how many tools it does take to strip the dash of a Porsche 356. While you're watching it, I'm going to be lapping my barrels into my cylinder head. So as you can see, we've progressed quite a long way with the restoration since I stripped the dash. But anyway, enjoy. Today is, in theory, day 7, so in theory I'm a week in. I was on the weekend, I was stripping the dash out. Unfortunately I couldn't get that finished because I had to go mow a field, but nonetheless I've come out tonight to get this done. So where we got to was, let me just turn this light on, see if this helps. No, is it even plugged in? No, the light's not plugged in. Okay, good. Oh, here we go, I can plug that in there. Oh, come on, hang on, I'm just gonna put you down. Oh. Okay, I have lights. Brilliant. So today I'm going to start with my light switch. And basically I'm going to work my way this way, down the dash. So then I'll be taking out the tachometer, my rev counter. I'll be taking out the hand throttle, then my oil temperature and fuel gauge, the fog light switch, and finally the ignition. And then there's some small like miscellaneous stuff under here. I've got a little toggle switch. Not sure what this does yet. It could either be potentially an anti-theft kind of kill switch type thing, or potentially a horn. This car's got a compressor under the bonnet for air horns. There is no horn ring and my steering wheel doesn't press. So this could be the horn switch. We'll have to see. The wiring will either prove that theory or disprove it. And then this here is like an auxiliary kind of power supply for auxiliary parts. But yeah, that's tonight's job. Get the dash stripped, and then I'm going to be getting under the bonnet, stripping out my heater controls, heater pipes, the ABS splasher, fuel tank, compressor for the horns. Don't have to get rid of the actual horns themselves because they're also missing. But yeah, let's go. Right, so while I get myself underneath the dash, in part 1 of Stripping Trouble's dash, I was counting, albeit badly, how many tools it would take to complete the job. In this video I'm going to continue the count and I promise to try and do a better job of it. So we're starting in this video with taking the light switch out, and I'm currently sat on a tool count of 10. Let's see how many more weird and wonderful tools I use to finish off this job. Okay, this is my light switch. These are all bullet connectors, so these will all pull out the back of the switch. So I think I'm going to get going. So I decided to take the switch out of the dash before disconnecting the bullets, as I thought it would give me better access to the wires. Removing it was similar to the wiper switch. All I had to do was unscrew the switch knob, then undo the bezel nut which clamped the switch to the dash. This was plain sailing, and unlike the wiper switch, I actually didn't need any tools. Right, with the switch free from the dash and dangling on its wires, I had much more room to pull the bullet connectors out the back of it. Luckily, these more or less came out without too much aggro. Some just needed a little more wiggling than others. Once the switch was off, I then reassembled it with the bezel nut and knob ready for cataloguing. So this dial here is the tachometer, or the rev counter. The tachometer or rev counter, whatever you want to call it, wasn't quite as simple as removing the speedo. Not only does it display the engine revs, but it also has a lot of indicator lights on it. So there was the mechanical drive to disconnect, which comes from the gearbox, and a lot of wires to unplug. 2 of these wires were just powering backlighting light bulbs, which illuminate the counter so that you can see it in the dark, and the rest were firing up indicator bulbs for a parking light indicator, a high beam indicator, and my indicators. This time I had no problem disconnecting the wires from the back of the rev counter like I did with the speedo, but instead of the spade connectors coming off the bulbs just pulled out of the instrument. Great. With all the wires off and the Bowden cable drive removed, I could then just undo my two nailed thumb nuts, take the clamp off and take the dial out the dash. Well, at least that's what I thought I would do. This is an interesting one. I actually can't get the rev counter out with the steering wheel on. It turns out there wasn't enough clearance between the dial and the steering column, so I actually had to drop my steering column to get the dial out. This meant undoing the steering column clamp using my first tool of the day, tool number 11, an Allen key. It's an M6 for those who want all the detail. Will that now come down? Okay, maybe enough to get this out. That's out. I'd need to check the workshop manual, but I couldn't see any other way of getting the rev counter out without taking the steering column off. Once I got it out, I then quickly put the steering column back on the car. With the steering column and steering wheel safely secured again, I moved on to the hand throttle. These are kind of things of the past in cars, but were used to increase the idle speed of a cold engine so that it didn't stall. Considering how small this dash switch is, it actually had a surprising number of fixings. There was a clamping nut holding it to the dash, there was then a cable clamp joining two cables, and there was another cable clamp holding the Bowden cable case to the bottom of the dash. They were 3 different fixings requiring 3 different tools, so we're pretty quickly going to start adding to our tool count. I started with undoing the cable connector under the dash. This had 2 little screws that were clamping the wires together to join them, and they were just flathead screws. And I'm pretty certain this flathead screwdriver is a bigger size than I was using in my previous video. So here's tool number 12, a bigger flathead screwdriver. I then undid the cable clamp using a 1/4 inch socket and square drive. No, it's not this one. It's not. This is too small. No, that one won't fit.
You wanted 8mm.
Can you put this on camera?
It is on camera. I want 9mm. It's obviously 9mm. Come on, it's German.
I want a complaint, right? The documentary of this has gone to pot. There is a desk full of bits.
Yeah, I've got a good memory. Once my mum had finished telling me off and we'd finally found a socket to fit the nut, we had tool number 13, a 9mm 1/4 inch square drive socket.
You're not an elephant.
You won't remember.
You won't remember.
With my memory fading, I forgot to film undoing the nut on the back of the hand throttle. But yes, this used tool number 14, an open-ended spanner. Once the nut was off, I was then able to just pull the hand throttle and its cable through the hole in the dash, which again I forgot to film. Maybe my mum's right, and I'm not an elephant. Moving left on the car, I then had to remove my oil temperature and fuel gauge. This was quite an easy job, as it was already kind of hanging out of the dash. There was no backing clip and there were no nailed thumb nuts to undo. So yeah, all I had to do is just pull this one forward and it came out, and then undo or disconnect all of these wires, which again, similar to my tachometer, these wires are all just either backing lights or indicator bulbs. So as well as having the oil temperature gauge and a fuel gauge on this dial, there is a light to notify me whether my battery's charging. There's a light to tell me whether I've lost oil pressure, which is critical for my engine. And there's also a load, or I say load, there's a series of backlights just for the dial in itself. So yeah, that's what all of these wires are doing. And then there were 2 earthing strips for both the gauges. They're the brown ones. Fortunately, all the bullet connectors for the gauges, they just pulled out, and my spade connectors on the light bulbs either came off the little spades on the light bulbs, or the light bulbs just pulled out the back of the gauge. So I managed to get all the wires off. Well, I say all. I managed to get the wires except the earths off without using any tools. The 2 earthing straps that were screwed to the back of the dial, they were a little more tricky to get out. One of them, in theory, they were supposed to be just like, again, thumb nuts, undo by finger. Tried undoing one of them by with my fingers, and instead of the nut coming off the stud just started coming out the dial, which wasn't ideal. So I decided to soak them in WD-40. After leaving them to soak for a while, I managed to undo one of them with my fingers, but the other one just wasn't moving. So what I did is I got the long nose pliers. This isn't a new tool, so I'm not increasing the tool count. But yeah, I got the long nose pliers on it just to give me a bit more purchase on the nailed nut. And that was enough to get it undone, or to break the kind of like stiction, and then I was able to take it off with my fingers. So yes, we got this gauge out, in theory, without using any new tools, but I did have to use some long nose pliers. Could you just stop making such a racket for 2 seconds?
You're so nasty to your mum. I'm only working for you.
So
If you want it quiet, it costs more.
we've made quite good progress with getting the dash out. I have no instruments anymore. The last few things are this mystery switch, my fog lights. They're not going to be going back on the car, so we can do something fun with that switch, and the ignition. But we're just going to stop for some refreshments. Ooh. Cheers.
Where's mine?
On the roof of the car.
You haven't done enough yet.
Can I have mine, please? Is that it?
Yeah.
Are you drinking on the job? I hope my scraping's going to be tidy.
Don't knock it over.
Once we'd finished our tea break, I then got going on the mystery switch. You'll be pleased to know that the mystery is soon about to be solved. So yeah, this little toggle switch was held underneath the dash with this knurled thumb bezel type nut that was just clamping it to the dash pressing. So I lubricated it with some WD-40 and then undid that with my fingers, so no tools needed. And then once it was off from under the dash, I was then able to get at the little clamping screws that were holding the wires in. So my dad used to have an old Mini,
Austin Cooper S. 1275.
And he was a bit of a boy racer, so naturally put some air horns on his Mini because, you know, normal small electrical horns not good enough, so he had air horns. And who made your air horns?
Fiam.
A company called Fiam. We have a air compressor on the front of the car under the bonnet, and you mentioned it was
It's a
Fiam.
Fiam.
It's a Fiam air compressor for some air horns. And I've just been taking off this switch, my mystery switch. We don't really know what it did, but I've just noticed the mystery switch has one wire which goes into this relay. And look what that relay says upside down. FIAM. F-I-A-M-M. I have a feeling this mystery switch was for my air horns. Nothing better than a horn that you can put on continuously. With the mystery solved, all I now had to do was just undo these little clamping screws to remove or to release these wires from the switch. To do this, I used another very small flathead screwdriver. This is it's not an electrical screwdriver, but it's kind of the same size as an electrical screwdriver, so it fits nicely in the screw heads. And it is a screwdriver that I've already used. I used this to undo the little locking washers on the heater controls. So again, I'm not counting this as another tool. So our tool count is still sat at 14 tools. Right, so next up on my hit list of things to remove from Trouble's dash was this auxiliary power socket. This is similar to USB ports in cars today. It was used to power auxiliary kind of accessories, which are apparently very rare. To take it out, all I had to do was pull out the bullet connector from the side and then undo its clamping bezel, similar to all the other switches. Unfortunately, I actually didn't film this apparently, but yes, again, no tools needed for this little guy. Only two switches left, my ignition switch and the fog lights. To get the ignition switch out, all I had to do was spin off this bezel nut and then take the switch out and disconnect all the bullet connectors going into the back. Well, some of these are tight.
They need to be. They're in good contact.
Oh, this is my ignition switch. And on here is scribed a very lucky number, which will allow me to one day start this car. With the ignition switch out, the last switch to remove was for my fog lights. This came off pretty simply. All I had to do was take the knob off, take the bezel nut off, clamping it to the dash, and then I could undo the little wires from the back. The tools I needed for this were tools that I'd used on the rest of the dash, so we finished stripping the dash with a tool count of 14 tools. If you'd asked me how many tools I'd need to strip the dash of trouble, I don't think I'd get anywhere near 14 tools. I thought most of this stuff would just unplug. Okay, so we have got all of the dash out, leaving a jungle of wires. So I'm going to now spend probably the rest of the evening just going through them with some electrical tape and just writing on them what they were. There's actually still quite a lot of wiring loom to take out, but we're going to do that once the rest of the car's stripped. While I'd been burying myself under the dash, removing all of the different kind of switches and dials, my mum had been out in the garage with me, busy scraping off all of the old sound deadening kind of bitumen. This stuff was plastered all over the inside of Trouble, and the idea behind it is to stop, well, A, to reduce noise inside the car, and to also stop panels drumming. It's a real pain to get off, and as you can see, I subcontracted it out to my mum. So what are you doing?
Doing the hard work. The easy bits, unscrewing things. This is the hard stuff. No, the reason why it has it on is because the engine is at the back.
Right. Is it? My mum's just informed me that the engine is at the back of the car. I was wondering where it was. I've actually been, as you may see, the bonnet is up. I've been looking under there for hours trying to work out where the engine is. Apparently it's at the back. Now that I could sleep easy knowing where Trouble's engine was, I got on with labelling all of the different wires under the dash that I'd just disconnected from Trouble's switches and instruments. This was the last job of the day.
Hello.
Whilst I was busy labelling, my mum had moved on to the door skins, removing all of the matting inside of those. This is how she got on with the back seats. Looks pretty good, right? So there we have it, 14 tools to strip the dash of a Porsche 356. I do have a confession. I've laid out all the tools here and I've only got 13 tools. I may or may not have counted a spanner twice. Yeah, I think my 15mm spanner turned up twice. So it's actually 13 tools, but give or take a few, who knows. And as you would have seen, my favourite tool did rock up, the 9mm. So pretty pleased we got to use him. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. If you did, please give it a like. And if you'd like to follow Trouble's journey back onto the road, don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next week.